Well, good morning and afternoon from wherever you are joining in from today. I am very thankful that you have tuned into the conversations. I am Crystal Porter, Captain Crystal Porter, the Associate Territorial Indigenous Ministries Consultant for the Salvation Army. And I'm really grateful for all of our participants who have joined the conversation today. Over the course of the next few months, each month, the Core Mission Department, and specifically my office, is looking at Truth and Reconciliation Commission conversations. What can we do to further this conversation within the territory? And I am thankful because for each of our sessions, we have received support from different departments at THQ. And this session, I'm very grateful for the Pathway of Hope and their partnership on these conversations today. And so to begin our conversations, you'll notice a land acknowledgement on the screen. We tend to do these in our sessions together. If you've been a part of the Indigenous Ministries webinars before, I have it on the screen and you can take a quick moment to read it loud. We want it to read some of those calls to action and the articles. And so I'm going to begin our conversation today with the TRC call to action number 48. And it says, we call upon the church parties to this settlement agreement and all other faith groups and interfaith social justice groups in Canada who have not already done so to formally adopt and comply with the principles, norms, self-determination in spiritual matters, including the right to practice, develop, and teach their own spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies consistent with the Article 12.1 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, engaging in ongoing public dialogue and actions to support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and issuing a statement no later than March 31st, 2016 from all religious denominations and faith groups as to how they will implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. On March 30th, of 2016, the Salvation Army was a partner that joined an ecumenical body of religious denominations and faith groups to make this commitment. And so a lot of the things that we do out of my office is a reflection of those commitments. I'm going to invite Sharon to read the United Nations Peoples articles.
Thanks, Crystal. Happy to be here with you all today, and the Community Engagement Department is happy to be partnering for you with today's session. Great to see some Pathway of Hope folks with us on the call. And for those that don't know me, my name is Sharon, and I'm a Territorial Pathway of Hope Specialist working on a THQ with the Community Engagement Department. So I will read out as part of our call to action these articles from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous peoples have the right to the full enjoyment as a collective or as individuals of all human rights and fundamental freedoms as recognized in the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and international human rights law, says the first article. Indigenous peoples and individuals are free and equal to all other peoples, and individuals have the right to be free from any kind of discrimination in the exercise of their rights, in particular that based on their Indigenous origin or identity. And that is taken from the second article of the Declaration. So once again, it's great to see you all here for this strength-based training. I can see that Crystal there is.
I am excited. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now to introduce Matt Leblanc. I've known Matt for a few years now. We've had some pretty crazy cool trips together, exploring different parts of the world, and just getting to know him as I guess a fellow Mi'kmaq person, and enjoying just doing life together and getting the opportunity to just do ministry together at points. And so I'm going to pass the conversation over to Matt, and I'm sure he'll share little pieces.
I think that's my cue as Crystal has frozen once again. Thanks, Crystal. If you can't hear me, but thanks for introducing me and then leaving so that I can talk about you behind your back and all the crazy things we've gotten up to in the world. It's good to be here. As Crystal's saying, my name is Matt Leblanc. My full name is Matthew James Joseph Gwelem Uchuusin Leblanc. Some of you may know my parents. My parents are Terry and Bev Leblanc, and we are connected to Mi'kmaq community in Eastern Canada, to the traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq, what we refer to as Mi'kmaqi. So Crystal has invited me to come and share a bit of story with you, and a bit of my experience in what you call strengths-based approaches to community development or to community engagement. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a further introduction to myself, a little stories of me, of some of my journey to being who I am and engaging in community development and community engagement in the ways that I do and that the organization I work with does. So as I said, I am connected to and from Mi'kmaq community in Eastern Canada. I'm also part Scottish and part French, so there's a good mix in there. As my father would say, father has said in the past, I have French blood polluting my veins. I mean, running through my veins. As an uncle of mine, Sam Chapman from New Zealand, a Maori man, would say, when he talks about the Scots, he's like, oh, I'm Maori and have a bit of Scottish in me by consumption. They once upon a time were a ceremonially cannibalistic group. So yeah, we're mixed people. I'm a mixed person. I'm not full Mi'kmaq, I'm not full Scottish, I'm not full French. I have a bit of all that in me. And growing up, it wasn't a singular path that I was on to say, oh, I'm Mi'kmaq, and I know all about that, and I was raised in that. There was a journey of becoming, of getting to know that, of getting to know what that meant. And it really didn't start until my teens when I got to travel across the world to a land called Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, New Zealand as we know it on our maps. I was young. I'm not going to say how old I was. I was young, in my teens, and we were there for a gathering called the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous Peoples, and it was kind of a vision of a couple, Linda and Monty Ohia from New Zealand, Maori couple, to gather together Indigenous peoples from all over the world to create a space that was open and secure, safe, welcoming to explore and express what reclaiming cultural traditions, knowledge systems, and practices could look like in our day and age, specifically as an expression of what it meant to be authentically Indigenous and authentically followers of the Jesus way. And so that gathering took place in New Zealand, and I, as a young kid, was able to join. And it was profound, the experience I had there. As I sat at the welcoming ceremonies, the opening ceremonies of this gathering, and the Maori community, the Maori tangata whenua, as they're called, the people of the land, the welcoming committee, stood up and welcomed us in their traditional manner of pōwhiri, their dance, their haka, their dances and so forth, and shook quite literally the ground we were standing on. It was something I'd never seen before people that were so proud of who they are and also knew who they were. And it was that profound moment that really impacted me to begin to ask a bunch of questions about myself, about what would it mean for me to be that proud of my own history, my own culture, my own community, my own ways of knowing and being, of expressing faith, of expressing culture, of expressing different things that we do in the world, but from a Mi'kmaq perspective, or from a Scottish perspective for that matter. But from a cultural context and rootedness in a land and a place that I had never known. And as I traveled and met with people that I started to understand that many people have been displaced from, for all of the reasons that that bring us to sitting in a space like this, for the reasons of colonization, of the residential school systems, of the 60s scoop, of the various things in our territory here in Canada and North America, as well as the replication or the simulation of those exact same things in other places around the world. So for me, it was an impacting moment to sit and see someone that was actually proud and understood who they were and weren't ashamed to express it. I had never seen that before with our community here in North America at that point in my life. That led me on quite a journey to travel a lot of the world. And as Crystal says, we've done a little bit of traveling together in some various places. I kind of took that to the extreme for much of my life. I traveled for years visiting Indigenous peoples in somewhere around 60 or 70 different countries, and sitting and listening and asking and saying, what does it mean to be you? What does it mean to be rooted? What are ways that me as someone that's not you could engage with you in a good way to support you being you in the best way possible? So I spent a lot of time traveling and asking those kinds of questions, experiencing them, living amongst people, and exploring some of those questions. In 2008, some of those travels and the relationships that had grown out of those kind of came to a point, or came to some sort of convergence, where me and a few friends started to have more conversation about what we might actually begin to do about some of the things we'd been hearing and listening to in our travels, and as people had talked with us about how we could support and assist in cultural reclamation, restoration of honoring and traditions, and bringing those back to the front of people's minds, as they talked about development, as they talked about missions, as they talked about those kinds of things. How could we be supportive of communities and cultures around the world? And so through those conversations in 2008, we began an organization called iEmergence. And so that's the organization I work with now, and I work with iEmergence as the director and founder. And we work in a few various countries around the world, looking at supporting Indigenous communities in their journeys of reclamation, restoration of human rights, of land rights, of those types of things. It looks different in every country. It looks different in every nation within every country. And so the learnings of what it means to relate cross-culturally, there's some base learnings that we have come to understand and we live by, of when working with and relating to and building relationship across cultures, that we've come to form as a foundation, as a guide for us to live by as we relate to people, as we relate in a way that hopefully is healthy, is encouraging, is honoring and respectful, and so forth and so on. And so I thought I'd share a little bit of that that core process with you today. We've kind of distilled it now for some of the trainings that we do for volunteers or people that are coming to work with high emergence, just to get everyone kind of on the same kind of headspace or way of thinking, ethos of how we communicate and how we engage cross-culturally. And you know, I read a little bit of what Crystal had sent me around the strength-based community development stuff that you at not Community of Hope. Sorry, I'm missing the name. Sharon, what was the name again?
Yeah, the Pathway of Hope.
Pathway of Hope. I should know that. I work for Indigenous Pathways. Pathways of Hope. And that you're looking at strength-based community development, of looking at what does it mean to be strength-based. And so this is very much rooted in similar idea to that. We look at asset-based. We look at appreciative inquiry and appreciative cross-cultural engagement. How do we be appreciative in our lives and in our approach and in the ways we relate to people? And so, yeah, I thought I would share a little bit of those ideas with you today, and we can have a little bit of discussion on them, if that sounds good. I also, thanks, Colleen. I'm also, I like to engage with people as I speak. And so if there, and Crystal, maybe you can monitor, if there are questions or thoughts, or if people have questions, or, you know, to raise your hand or to write a message in the chat. I love to engage rather than just speak at people, because I just find it more fulfilling to everyone when we have a conversation. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts, please feel free to throw them in the chat or bug Crystal to tell me about it. I am going to share a screen now. I think I'm allowed to. So, as I said, appreciative cross-cultural engagement training. This came out of some training and some education we did around appreciative inquiry and asset-based community development, or asset-based development methodologies. So appreciative cross-cultural and training became a condensed version of that we use to help, as I said, bring people onto this ethos of what it means to appreciate cross-culturally. So we used a base understanding of appreciative inquiry as the base model of some of the methodology, but also the psychology and the thinking behind why being appreciative in our approach to other peoples and other cultures and development in general is more human, it more related to the core values and understanding of who we are as human beings. So I want to walk through appreciative inquiry with you, a brief overview. So appreciative inquiry just very simply means a positive way to build people, organizations, communities, futures. Appreciative inquiry asks us to think slightly different, or asks us to change the worldview that we choose to be the lens that we interact with other people, or ourselves, or organizations. Traditionally, I'll just wait for that to quiet down. Awesome. Traditionally, and I don't mean traditionally as in Indigenous traditionally, I mean more commonly as human beings, we tend to focus on a deficit-based methodology and way of thinking about most things in life, about ourselves, about our job, about the future. And it has kind of an approach to it, and a kind of how we deal with things. So we first always kind of look at problems in our world, and problem solving is our main methodology for how to deal with life. Is there's a problem and how do we solve it? And The way we do that is to identify that problem, determine the root causes, brainstorm for solutions, create some sort of impact analysis on those solutions, select whichever appropriate solution we think will work, develop some action plans towards those solutions, implement that plan, and then evaluate and see if that plan worked. See if we've solved the problem. Asset-based approaches ask us to, or invite us to ask different questions than what is the problem. Asset-based or appreciative inquiry approach asks us to first identify and value what gave life and what currently gives life. When we are living at our best, what does that look like? When we have lived at our best, what does that look like? Then it asks us to take that understanding of when life is at its best, envision what could be now, saying, we already know when life's at its best, this is what it looks like. How could those things happen again now? It asks us to determine what we will do based on those things, and then design towards a future we desire. Decide and design what will be. And then, of course, identify and value what is working. And so instead of evaluate, we evaluate. What is happening that is valuable here? So as you see the comparison, instead of saying, what is the problem? How do we fix it? We say, when things are working well, what's happening? And how do we do more of those things? How do we build with materials that are good, that work, that we know work? Creating this environment asks us to focus on positive questions and listening to stories, recognizing gifts and skills in people instead of the problems perhaps that exist or that we perceive exist. It asks us instead to value relationships and community, identifying assets within those communities and encouraging imagination for people to understand what life at its best may look like. When one of the ways or one of the reasons that that we have for this default problem solving or problem-based thinking is in some ways how it is the training we've gotten from even theological training. When we say, biblically speaking, there are a few ways that we can read the Bible. Everyone knows interpretation is a lot of how we read things. The worldview or the lens through which you read something will change how you read that. And what you take from that reading, especially if it's something like a biblical text or so forth, will direct your focus in other relationships, will become a predominant focus on how you develop other relationships. When we look at the beginning in the Bible, we can look at two different stories or two different ways or two different starting points within our biblical text that influences how we see the world. Most of the time, although it's not the beginning of Genesis, we start our theological thinking in Genesis 3. It says, look at the pitiful situation in which we find ourselves. As we know, those that do know, Genesis 3 looks at the fall, looks at sin coming into the world. And so we base ourselves or root ourselves in this idea that there are problems. Sin is a problem, and we must solve that problem by doing various things. However, the biblical narrative actually starts a couple chapters before that and roots itself in a story where everything is good. Everything is very good. Everything is there and a template of what it means to live on the earth and with others in a good way. Not just other humans, but other beings in all ways, shapes, and forms, the earth itself. So it says, actually, the starting point was good and is good. And if we choose to begin there, we always have a place saying, we're going back there. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to live out when it's at its best. What does it look like? So these are kind of the appreciative inquiry, kind of asset-based shifts in thinking, the reshaping how we view the world around us. This reimagining or this shift that you take actually affects pretty much anything we choose to do with others, and your relationships and the engagements that we have, because we approach those instead of looking for problems, looking for the beauty that already exists there and appreciating what exists there and building on that appreciation. Appreciative inquiry gives us a little bit of a framework to do that as well. So I want to go through a little bit of the framework that it asks us and why we use that framework. Oops, here we go. So the 4D cycle is an appreciative inquiry model that we use and we adjust, and we've messed with a little bit to be more contextual to how we use it into the communities we are involved in. But the general process helps us in our thinking of when working with community or with others, what is a process that we can go through that helps move us along in an appreciative way of respecting and honoring those from that maybe don't think like us or don't act like us or don't believe the same things we believe, but nonetheless, we're working with them and we want to engage with them. So if the 4D cycle runs us through something called discovery, dreaming, discovery, inquiring into the best of the past and the present, valuing what gives life and what gave life. So this idea of discovery takes us to ask questions to say is, when life was at its best, what did it look like? When life is at its best currently, what does that look like? And then understand those factors or those core values or those core realities that make for those successes, for that life being positive. It then asks us to use those findings from the stories we've told to dream about what the future could look like based on what we've learned. It asks us to take those in design, determining what should be, and then actually go out and do it. Delivery. So that's a basic overview of appreciative inquiry and an approach to how to be appreciative cross-culturally in a way that we understand how to do that. When we're as an example, I remember when I was living in the Philippines, and so we've worked in the Philippines for quite some years, and wait, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Then I can see all of your faces. Otherwise, I'm just staring at my own PowerPoint. It's no fun. When I was in the Philippines and we're working there, I was invited into many different contexts and Indigenous community and so forth. And we worked with some partners over there. I remember them telling me a story of their very first engagement with Indigenous community in one of the areas in the Philippines, and how they went up because they were invited, and they came across a community that was living up in the mountains, living quite remote, and living, and living in a way that we would call, or we would in the Western world think of as third world, as backwards, as living in the jungles and in little huts and so forth and so on. And they went in to have conversations and so forth, and to talk with the community, because the community had asked and said, can you come and help us? We have some things maybe you could help us do. We'd like your help. And so they went in there and looked around and had conversations, and they came out with the idea that health and hygiene was the most important thing they could do. Like, they need health and hygiene. This is horrific. We need dentistry up here. We need doctors, we need, health stuff. They know enough not to force an opinion or an idea, but ask the community after all the conversations. After all we've talked about, what do you think we could help you do? And the community responded quite clearly and without extra thought and said, we'd like you to build us a basketball court. Now, that didn't seem like that would solve any of their problems, because what is a basketball court going to do about dental hygiene and health and wellness, other than maybe some fitness from throwing a basketball? So the community was very adamant, says we would like you to help us build a basketball court. And so basketball is pretty big in the Philippines. I don't know if anyone knows that, but it's pretty big in the Philippines. And so the organization, and to their credit, said, we want to help you do the thing that you feel it will be best for your community. And so they helped them build a basketball court. Not long after it was built, it became the center of all community gatherings. It became the center of all community conversation. It became the place where decisions were made and relationships were made and conversations were held that launched the community into a movement of development towards restoration of community values and culture, but also into a restoration of healthy living that they once had known. The community actually knew best, because they knew they needed that place to gather as a people, that they needed to be at the wheel of their own journey of development of what is healthy and what is right, and that had to all root in their own conversations. The outsiders helped them build a basketball court, and it made drastic and beautiful changes, and it changed the way that organization had relationships in community from that point forward, and really understanding how to listen to community stories about what healthy living looks like for them, and not introduce outside solutions to perceived problems from an outside perspective, because we tend to have those when we relate to someone else. We come with our own worldview and mindset and of course way of thinking what is right. What is right for me could just be right for me and may not be right for me. Just is. So I'm going to go back to any comments or thoughts, questions? No, okay. I don't see any in the chat. I was just bringing it up. So how do we go about and engage with community to actually listen well? We do this by asking questions. We do this by when being invited to community or to be with people, to enter with a questioning posture, with a humble I don't know posture, a humble I don't have the answers posture, that says you do have the answers, and perhaps some of the questions I ask may help you to articulate the journey forward for yourself or for your own people. That's how we see ourselves as iEmergence, as facilitators, as catalysts for others to rediscover for themselves the pathways that are healthy for them to follow into their future. We help them create, through this process of appreciative inquiry, the common factors, the raw materials of their accomplishments and successes in the past, and achievements and successes in the present, that we call this positive core, that becomes a toolbox, a bag of materials with which to build. When life is at its best, these things are happening. So how do I make these things happen more in new ways, in different ways? How do I reimagine those things into my life or into my community at this time? Those achievements, those positive core, those successes can be anything from that's on this list. I'm not going to go through that. Wisdoms and social capital, embedded knowledges, material assets, positive emotions, best practices, all those types of things can be an asset. When it's at its best, here are the best practices, here are the material assets, here is the type of social capital that we have, here are the core competencies that should exist or need to exist or have existed before in us that we need to recover and restore. So this is about regaining and re-understanding what this positive core may look like for an individual, a community, or an organization, or anything like that. And that's the process of discovery. We discover, we rediscover these things. To rediscover these things, we use a storytelling approach. Why do we use a storytelling approach? Well, because we like telling stories, and we sit around and do a lot of time sitting around fires and campfires and everywhere just to share stories, because sharing stories does a few things for us as human beings that doing filling out surveys and so forth does not. It's a way of gathering holistic information, not only the facts about something, but also the feelings behind it that affect a person, experiences in any given situation. Telling stories to each other builds bonds, builds relationship, builds an understanding that a sheet of paper with facts on it cannot. It's one of the reasons in iEmergence where one of our 4 core values that direct us and guide us, the foremost of that is relationship. Relationship comes before all things, whether that be projects, programs, money, the completion of something. The relationships come first, and they trump everything. We will say no to money. We will say no to projects. We'll trash projects if it's going to mean saving relationships or encouraging better and stronger relationships with people. So this idea of storytelling, of sitting around and taking the time and spending the time to actually sit and listen, to ask good questions without assumption or without premeditated ideas of what the answers should be, is a pretty strong way to build good relationships and encourage people to understand themselves better and create a positive future for themselves. We can help them to wander through those stories and find the valuable things with them. So, one of my favorite times oh, sorry. Hi, Richard, Nicole, Bobby, and Sandra. Yes, you can have a copy of this, and everyone else can too, if they would like it. I'm going a little bit quickly because I was told that I have an hour, and this is really long, and I could sit here for 3 hours and tell stories with you. As I've just said, stories. So I'm going to tell you another little story. So this picture you see in front of us, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. Muriel Rukeyser. It's a beautiful quote, and the picture behind it is a time that I spent a lot of time in northeastern India, up in Nagaland and Meghalaya, Mizoram, and places in northeastern India that are close to Burma, and in that area of the world. And these gentlemen you see on the left were traditional leaders of the area that I was in that have had a difficult history with Christian mission and colonization in their areas. I was invited up there some time ago. 2008, I think, was my first trip up there. And I was invited by a friend, comes among Naite, who's a indigenous fellow from up in Shillong, northeastern India. invited me. He said, you know, this idea is these things you're talking about creating space for Indigenous community to be themselves. I think we need that up here. I think can we do a gathering? And so again, this is a long story, so I'm going to make it a lot shorter than it should be. But through conversation and so forth, I was like, yeah, we'd love to come and do that. Some of the way we do that is we need to be invited by the peoples of that space, of that land, to come and do that thing. If it's something that they feel is good and is right and so forth. And so I was able to meet these two gentlemen on the left of the picture. Actually, it was their representative that I met first for the first 3 or 4 times that we talked. These were the 12 chiefs of the area. And I met their representative for many times and talked about this gathering we wanted to have of youth, young people celebrating culture and traditions. I was told very, very straight up at first that Christian and religious things were not welcome because they had destroyed their people for years and years and years. That there was a massive gap and divide in culture and community there of those peoples that had chosen to become Christian and those that had chosen to remain traditional, to the point of if you did one, you were never allowed or welcomed at any events or with any family in the other. It's very, very stark line drawn in the sand. Conversations saying, yeah, no, I get that. We experience that. We understand that in our communities. We get that. And so after some conversation and so forth, and sharing kind of the gathering we were hoping to do, they felt it was an okay thing to do. They said, you know what, it's good to encourage our young people to respect and honor their culture, and those that have chosen a different religious path, it's good for them to relearn what it means to respect and honor our culture. And so they allowed us to do a gathering there. Just as we were preparing to do the gathering and doing all the setup and the planning, I was able to meet with the representative again and invite them to come. I said, we would love you to come and do a traditional ceremony to welcome us if you would. We feel that's important. And we didn't know if they were going to come. It was 2 days before the gathering was going to happen, and we got a call from the representative saying, yep, some of the chiefs will come and do a traditional welcome. Like, okay, that would be amazing. And so we redid a whole bunch of stuff and created some space. And then lo and behold, when the day came, 12 of them, all of them came. All of them came. And we were like, okay, scramble. How do we make this work so that we're, taking care of them and respecting all this kind of stuff? And so we did. And the representative talked to me and said, they've come, they're going to do the welcome, then they're going to leave right away because they don't attend these types of things. And so they did. I was like, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate it. We had gifts for them. We welcomed them on stage, gave them gifts after they did their welcome. And then we were going to begin the gathering and they were still standing around. So we scurried around once again and said, oh, chairs, comfortable chairs. Where's some comfortable chairs? We need some place for people to sit. And so they decided to sit. We put them in the front row and they sat for the whole evening of this gathering. And the whole evening just was their young people from their communities singing in traditional ways, dancing in traditional ways, sharing traditional ceremony and so forth. And my father, who's standing with the headdress beside me there in the picture, was there. And my sister was there actually too. But he was sitting in the row at the end of that row. He's like, you're old, you can sit with the elders. And so he was sitting there and as we were going about that whole evening, he looked down there, he told me to say, he looked down the row and there wasn't a dry eye of all these chiefs sitting in the front row. And afterwards, this is the picture of afterwards, where we sat and talked and through translation and so forth. I was just asking, since like, thank you for staying. What made you stay, or why? How did you feel about it? What was? And they said, we've never seen our young people so proud of being who they were. And I don't care who you are, if you're able to do that for our young people, you're welcome here anytime. And it was we never spoke anything. We never yeah, we're faith-based and all that stuff. We didn't do anything Christian or anything. It was, how do we create space for people to just be themselves? And the relationship that the community now has there in northeastern India with the local community about youth gatherings and all that kind of stuff has expanded past that, and it's grown into something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it was just by sitting and listening to those stories, and asking questions and helping ourselves to understand that we're able to kind of do that without any agendas on our behalf, saying, you know, we have missional agenda or anything. None of those kinds of things. But our agenda was relationship. Our agenda is how do we be better humans together than we have been before. And so it's an important part. So the stories became are a central part of how we do that and how we build relationships and how we feel cross-culturally in communities. Okay. So in that vein, I don't know if there was any questions. Crystal?
Sorry, I have my
Okay.
camera off, but I've been monitoring for questions. I haven't seen
Okay.
any. I'm currently in northern BC and the internet's not great. So if I have my video
Sweet.
on, I'm afraid I'm going to close the meeting again.
Okay. I would love to take a moment and have you guys, Chris, are we set up for breakout groups?
I can easily make it happen.
Okay. Love to do just a little example of storytelling. It's not going to be long. We don't have hours to sit, although perhaps one day we can sit around and tell my stories. I'd like to share a question with you and ask you to go into some groups and tell a very brief, short story with each other. I'd like you to do it in a specific way, where everyone just shares a brief story, but everyone listens. There's going to be tons of you, so in each group there'll be a bunch of you. So listen to the stories that other people are sharing. Again, not even a minute story, an experience, a quick experience. Maybe only 5 or 6 people in a group, Crystal, if that's possible.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Share a story, and as other people are sharing their stories quickly, a minute story, a 2-minute story, listen for a few of the positive core that we were talking about before. A few of the common factors of the accomplishments, the things within that story that seemed to be important to that being such a positive story or an experience for that person. Could be an emotion, could be a fact, could be a technical thing, a best practice. It could be anything that you feel. And just pick a word or 2 words that describe that for you. So I'm going to give you a question. And you don't have, first is just a little preamble. Oops. When relationships with other people are healthy and life-giving, when they make us and others feel like we are acting our best toward one another, we live in ways that create a better sense of well-being for everyone. When this takes place, we also find that the communities in which we live function at their best, that people are being well cared for, and there's a sense of happiness in living there. Think about a community you were or are a part of that was important in your life, where you felt a sense of belonging and comfort. It could be within your family, a community where you lived, local church, institution, school, or organization, any of those. Share a story about this time. Some follow-up questions could be that you want to include in your story of what was happening in the community that you're talking about. Who was there? How was the interaction going on between you and others? How did they respond and you respond to any interactions? What were you feeling? What were they feeling? And was there any positive effects that came out of this experience you're talking about? So again, the question is thinking about a community you're a part of or were a part of that was important in your life and where you felt a sense of belonging and comfort. And share a story about that community. a short story, but a story that was important to you that first pops into your head. Listen to that, and everyone come back with a word or 2 words from something they've heard.
Okay, so you should be in breakout rooms and they're set for 5 minutes. So quick stories.
Do it in their conversation. Did anyone get to tell a story? Did one person get to tell a story?
One person.
Yeah, I was gonna say 5 minutes. That's like 1 story maximum. Well, thank you for going into groups and at least attempting to share stories. I appreciate it. If anyone has a word that came out of the one story that they heard, or a couple words, a brief phrase, can you type it into the chat? And just then everyone can just type in a word that they heard. Don't read the ones that are put up before you, just write them in. Whatever word comes to mind. Thanks for the words, everyone. If you did scroll through these, you'll notice, and it happens every single time, that no matter what stories people shared, you'll start to find a convergence between these stories of some common factors, some common things that make for good experiences within community. It's quite common, actually, across the world. We have multiple cultures and communities represented here in this call, yet at the core, we have some common understandings of what it means to be in good community, to feel welcome, to feel accepted, respected, honored. And as we share stories, even in pretty diverse spaces, we can distill that down to some very common values and ways of understanding and ways of relating to each other that are mutually beneficial and mutually respectful. Good ways to relate to others. We use questions like this, similar to this, or a version of this in conversation with community all the time, to help us understand, to help the conversation to become a place where we can find common ground, common space, either between us and them or within their own community. So most of our organization's role is, as I said before, a facilitator or a catalyst, where our views and ideas about life don't matter at all. We aren't the important ones in this conversation whatsoever. And so these questions, when we're invited to come and do this within community, we bring these questions and invite the community to have conversations amongst themselves around this question or questions similar to this. We listen and help to pull out those positive cores, those appreciative things that we hear in their stories, so that we can present that back to them and say, this is what we heard from your stories. Does this sound right? Does this sound like you? And inevitably it does, because it's from their stories that we're listening. And it's being a mirror or a reflection for them of their own stories and their own successes and their own values and ways of being that are healthy and that will provide the foundation for them to continue to grow and to become all that they perhaps dream to become. So for us, cross-cultural communication and cross-cultural engagement really sits within that. There's a difference between
This is too long to be
when we're invited to. So next week I'm coming to Winnipeg. Actually, I was supposed to be in Winnipeg already doing this call, but my plane got canceled, as we all realize happens often nowadays. And so I'm stuck in Prince Edward Island, and I'm flying out. My flight leaves in about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. They'll hold it for me, I'm sure. But I'm flying to Winnipeg to a community from Northern Ontario, Mishki-Gogamung First Nation, that we partner with for many years. They're bringing down a group of their leaders to come into Winnipeg, and we're going to sit for a week, and we're going to go through a process similar to this, where I've developed some questions for us to discuss, for them to share and sit in space And we're going to help them to walk through what they're talking about and what in their stories and in their thinking and in their dreaming, we're hearing them say, so that we can be that reflection and help them to see what they're wanting to do and their pathways forward. Again, not about us, but really we can be as people, as good neighbors. We can be a support to those that are walking through difficult situations, or this recovery, or this movement to once again become the people that they once were, or that they still are and want to express. We can do that by listening well, by listening without agenda, by inquiring in a positive, life-giving manner, an appreciative manner into the uniqueness that makes peoples and communities who they are, and encouraging that. I think we can do that well as people that are focused on humanitarian things. They're focused in things like the Salvation Army is all about working with people and creating spaces where people can become healthy again. So I think we have a big role in those things, and we can do so in good ways when we look at every single person that walks across our path, in every culture and community and faith, and in a positive way, in an appreciative way, understanding that they have things and understanding that we don't, that we can learn from anyone that crosses our path, and to learn that appreciative mindset and a worldview. One of the comments earlier in the chat was around that mindset shift is the most difficult thing we can do, and it is. Because we want to solve problems because we've been taught to. We want to see problems because we've been taught to. We want to see difference as a negative thing because we've been taught to. Someone that thinks or believes or does things differently must be wrong because I am right. We have to get away from that mindset. I have to change that to looking at others and saying, wow, they do things differently. I'd love to learn how they do it, why they do it, what makes it so important, and allow that to help us grow as individuals and as organizations, maybe broadening our understanding about things. So that's our journey, and our goal is iEmergence, is Indigenous Pathways. As Crystal said, we've been on some journeys like that together, of just sharing and listening in community. It's a pretty profound and it's an honoring place to sit in when you're asked to and invited to come and sit in someone else's space. I think that's all for me, Crystal.
Thanks so much, Matt. We really appreciated all the teachings that you brought us today. One of the exciting things that the Salvation Army partners with Indigenous Pathways is the celebration of culture. A very exciting weekend where you can come, and again, another opportunity to learn and sit and listen, and those opportunities to sit together. And so we invite you. It's September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Pine Lake, Alberta.
Right.
There'll be more save the date information out about that. But yeah, we would typically we have a few people from Indigenous Pathways join us and provide us with additional teachings as well, and just be together. But very thankful for everybody who was able to attend today's call. This video will be edited, just made a little bit prettier, and by our tech team, and then we'll send it out to the participants along with the PowerPoint slide as well. So you will have access to that if you registered for the event, but I'll also send the links over to Sharon, and she'll make sure that all the Pathway of Hope provider groups do have that access as well, if you didn't register and you just clicked on the link. Next month, March 23rd, at the same time, Core Missions is offering another webinar focused on Indigenous spirituality and the church, and we invite you to come as well. But I would like, if you would like, you can just share in a thank you to Matt in the chat, and I know he has to take off to get on that flight, which I will be hosting him for supper next week. So
still here for a few minutes,
Winnipeg.
yeah.
So I'll see
Winnipeg,
you in
Crystal.
Winnipeg next week. But thank you everybody for coming and attending.
Yeah, hope to see you all in person once, or some of you in person at some point. It'd be great.
Thank you so much.